Hello there and welcome. If you are in Africa at the moment or you share the same time zone, then you'll agree it's that time of the week to relax, reflect, plan and then hope for the best. In the last 7 days, lessons were learned, history was made as heroes of the past continue to make way for champions of the future. This is Africa This Week and I'm your guide, Fadisha Lashotima. We'll start off the day with earlier in the week. Welcome aboard. On Monday, at least 6 persons were killed in an Al-Shabaab attack on a local government building in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. An ambulance service, which confirmed the death toll, said it also transported 16 injured persons. Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab frequently carries out bombings and gun attacks in the city and other parts of Somalia. Late former United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan made his final journey home to Ghana on Monday when his body landed at Accra's Kotoka International Airport. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo greeted Annan's wife, Maria Annan, and Annan's children, as well as grandchildren, before the coffin, draped with the blue UN flag, was carried out of the plane. And after a brief ceremony, soldiers changed the UN flag for the national colors over the casket before carrying the coffin into a hearse. Still on Monday, 4 persons were killed in Tripoli after armed men stormed the headquarters of Libya's national oil company, engaging guards in a deadly gun battle. One large blast went off in an apparent suicide attack as security forces fought to regain control of the key building. The health ministry said at least 2 of the company's staff were killed, 10 wounded, while 2 gunmen also died in the attack. Security officials have labeled the incident a terrorist attack, although no group has claimed responsibility. On Tuesday, 20 people were reported to have died of cholera outbreak in Harare, Zimbabwe's capital city.
Zimbabwe declared a cholera outbreak in the capital, Harare, on Tuesday, September 11, after 20 people died from the disease. The country's new health minister, Obadiah Moyo, confirmed that more than 2,000 people were infected by drinking contaminated water. The latest cholera outbreak came after bestsellers used by residents in Budiriro and Glenville suburbs were contaminated. Glenville resident Sherry Mochanbaya says she is fed up and blamed the council for not doing enough, saying the council does not attend to landfill sites. Harare City Council has struggled to supply water to some suburbs for more than a decade, forcing residents to rely on water from open wells and community boreholes. Zimbabwe suffered its biggest cholera outbreak in 2008 at the height of an economic crisis when more than 4,000 people died and another 40,000 were being treated after being infected.
A memorial service was held at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Abuja, in honor of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Kofi Annan. A solemn service which saw dignitaries pouring encomium on the departed icon was organized by the United Nations system in Nigeria in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the High Commission of Ghana in Abuja. This story, however, contains flash photography.
Kofi Annan, the 7th Secretary General of the United Nations and the first Black Secretary General of the international organization, was also awarded a Nobel Prize for Peace as recognition for his many efforts in advocating peace around the world. Kofi Annan died on the 18th of August 2018 at the age of 80 in Switzerland after a brief illness.
May his soul.
Tributes from around the world have been pouring in since his death. This continued at his memorial service.
The late Kofi Annan was a very, very distinguished diplomat whose footprints will remain indelible, not only in the annals of the United Nations, but also in the sands of time. And he left no stone unturned in the global collective efforts to achieve sustainable peace and development.
Kofi Annan and the UN.
The Ghana High Commissioner in his tribute gave a brief background on the early life of Kofi Annan and his contributions at the United Nations, while others also spoke glowingly of his works.
In Ghana, the name Kofi is given to a male child born on Friday, while Ata signifies a twin born.
Just the mortal remains of a man whose time on earth touched our hearts to care for one another, to love rather than to hate, to show fairness in the dispensation of justice, to respect our inalienable rights as human beings, to make peace rather than war, and to protect and preserve our common planet and our common humanity. Such a man never dies, because his ideals for which he lived are eternal.
That we share Kofi Annan with the Ghanaian people. He was really doing a lot on gender equality and, as we have heard today, about peacekeeping. I think you must be very proud to have such a fantastic man from Africa.
Programs initiated by Kofi Annan at the United Nations have largely centered around education, gender equality, peace and security. His most successful initiative till date is the Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, and the establishment of the global funds targeted at the HIV/AIDS pandemic.
As we say farewell to this remarkable man, we must do so with a recognition of his considerable talent in successfully navigating the competing interests of the superpowers and yet successfully building a universal consensus around a rejuvenated United Nations.
It is very certain his legacies will live on and his works to humanity will never be forgotten.
The icon, Kofi Annan. Well, on Wednesday, Zimbabwe's police banned all public gatherings in order to control the spread of cholera, which has killed 21 people in the country's capital, Harare. The move comes a day after the government declared an emergency following the outbreak of the disease. The National Police urged members of the public to take heed of the ban, but did not say how long it will last. The main opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, had earlier on Wednesday visited clinics where cholera patients were being treated. He called for a collaboration between city health officials and the government. Zimbabwe's health ministry says more than 3,000 people have been infected by cholera, and the disease has now spread outside the capital. Well, Ghana bid farewell to former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan on Thursday in a full state funeral attended by African leaders and international statesmen. Annan's coffin was placed atop a cannon for the final journey to the cemetery, where a small private ceremony was held. About 6,000 mourners packed the auditorium for Thursday's official service, the climax of a multi-day funeral ceremony, which has seen his coffin draped in the Ghanaian national colors, displayed for public viewing. A Ghanaian national and Nobel laureate, Annan died in a Swiss hospital last month at the age of 80.
Well, it was a beautiful ceremony. I don't know I have not been part of any ceremony at which the whole world is so fully represented. And that testifies to what he was and continues to be for us as a citizen of the global world.
I would say that Kofi Annan was the embodiment of humility, the embodiment of a peacemaker, peacemaking individuals. He was also somebody who cared for the poor.
I think that Kofi Annan deserves every honor that we gave him today. I mean, he's a great man, he's a peace-loving person, he's done so much for the world. I mean, for me, he's the president of the world, you know, and that makes me proud to call myself a Ghanaian.
It was in the news on Friday that Nigeria's domestic debt stock stood at 3.5 trillion naira as at the first half of this year. And according to the Debt Management Office, the figure indicates that 36 states and the FCT increased their debt stock by about 200 billion naira, or 6% over the 3.3 trillion naira recorded at the end of December last year. Data released by the DMO shows that Lagos State has the highest debt stock at 517 billion naira, or 17% of the total debt stock of states. And with that, we have come to the end of Earlier in the Week. Up next is Digging Deep, and that will be after the break. Just stay with us. Welcome back to Africa This Week. Well, Africa is a continent rich in cultural heritage, traditional values and superstitious beliefs, which may sometimes mean not caring enough for the living and never speaking ill of the dead. Now, perhaps these are the reasons why eulogies, accolades and commendations trailed the demise and burial of Kofi Annan, renowned diplomat, Nobel laureate, and first African to become Secretary General of the United Nations. Joining me to dig deep on Africa this week is Tony Dania, a lawyer and political analyst. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon.
The man, Kofi Annan.
Yes.
He was a diplomat, he was a Nobel laureate, he was an international statesman. What do you think made him so popular?
You didn't hide that he was also a globally renowned rights activist.
Rights activist.
Yes.
Well, we'll add that to it.
Yes, because he assisted in the establishment of the International Human Rights Commission and the amendment to the International Human Rights, the Charter on International Human Rights. And he has been a man that brought peace to volatile part of the world.
Indeed, and that's what earned him the
Some
peace.
are not even reported. He played a very big role in the peace we're enjoying in Kenya today, but I've not read it anywhere. I'm also aware of the friction between Nigeria and Cameroon, the role he played.
Okay.
Over what do you call it? The boundary between Nigeria and Cameroon.
And Cameroon.
Yeah, so...
Bakassi Peninsula?
Bakassi Peninsula, yeah. So... the eulogies and the commendations are well deserved. They are not pretentious at all. Kofi Annan deserves it. We are proud that, apart from being the first African to rise to that position of Secretary General, we need to also know that he has been working in the United Nations for a very long time before he became the Secretary General.
Yeah.
He was actually an Assistant Secretary General in some department. He was at a time the head of finance. And you know, he took over from Bitrus Gali and he handed over to Ki-moon. So, yeah, and that period between 1997 when he was appointed and 2006 when he left the office, is to date one of the most popular. He's the seventh, but he's so popular. One, maybe because the first African. And
that's
two,
the key one.
Yes,
yeah,
and two, maybe because people never expected that he would perform the way he did. He was bold enough. I call him the global rights activist because where the superpowers roar, he calms them down and tell them the truth to their faces. When America,
and in a very calming voice.
Yes, when America invaded Iraq, Kofi Annan was bold enough to say it was not sanctioned by the United Nations.
What will he be most remembered for?
Yeah, I think Kofi Annan brought to the notice of the world the malaria problem we have in Africa, and I think that is most commendable. He was able to set up a funds commission for the purpose of fighting HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. Malaria is more rampant in Africa. So that means he had Africans in mind. So I think that one. Then the peace effort he brought to the world. The fact that he was bold most often, and like you said, in a very polite and calm way, to talk to the superpowers. This made him popular. And when you see him in countries of white, speaking as an international figure and saying the truth eloquently, the way he has always done, and he talks without look. Most of the time, I don't see him read. Very eloquent, very articulate. Yes. So he lived 80. You know, we will always want a good person to live forever, if possible.
You know, no one actually really thought he was that old.
Yes, 80 years.
Yeah.
Because he was not looking like 80.
He didn't look 80.
And he walked until he died.
Yeah.
He was always walking. The person that would have been like Kofi Annan, you can compare Nelson Mandela to Kofi Annan.
Yeah.
You can look at...
I was going to ask you that question. Now, Kofi Annan got his first job in the UN as a budget officer. I think you mentioned that for the World Health Organization, that's the WHO.
Yes.
And then he grew to be the 7th UN Secretary General in 1997. How much of his legacies actually made an impact on Africa?
Well, I don't know. The man put in so much effort to elevate Africa from the position he met us. His efforts are appreciated in the area of health, peacekeeping, and human rights. I think we have not learned enough from what I would say Mandela did and what Kofi Annan has done. Even the South Africa, for instance, digressing a little bit, if they have learned from their father, Mandela, they will not attack non-Africans. We are supposed to be one big family in Africa. And other African countries assisted greatly during the apartheid regime. So Kofi Annan tried to bring that unity. He was a global citizen, but he tactically assisted Africans. Leaders, this idea of sit tight on power thing has not stopped. The idea of trying to manipulate existing system has not stopped. The tendency, I don't know whether it is deliberate that African leaders are refraining from moving forward. Let's else see countries in Africa referred to as advanced countries, countries that other Nigerians has the potential to become an advanced country if we look at issues detached from sentiment. If you look at what are the things that will do that would help the country to grow. One, fix the light. Let the light work. Let there be electricity. The money that will be saved will be in private individual pocket, not the government pocket. Then politics. We are spending so much money on politics and we make it too risky. If you calculate what is spent on politics, elections, if we can remove it, that is, for instance, the parties, the government, INEC put together, it's about 700 billion naira. And that will go a long way. Are there no ways we can save this cost? You know, somebody suggested tying your PVC to your BVN. But you see, you have to be 18 years before you can start banking and before you can vote. So how many persons that are 18 years and above are bankers? Because you need to have account primarily before you get BVN. I'm just digressing and trying to look at it. Yeah. But you see, I don't know who will occupy in Africa, who can right now occupy that position.
Yeah, that's the question.
We thought...
Which African do you think can walk in Kofi Annan's shoes?
I don't know. I have not... there is this African man, what is his name? Very... from Somalia that have been... I can't really recall his name now. In Nigeria here, we thought about 10 years, 15 years, 10 years ago, about 10, 12 years ago, honestly speaking, I thought our OBG, Obasanjo, would be able to. Because Obasanjo suffered a little bit in the hand of the military. And when he was a military head of state, he impressed everybody. So he had that good will and background. But when he became the president, civilian president, thereafter, a lot of confusion came in. Misgiving, mistrust, unnecessary politics.
So he definitely can work in
and I think he attempted to contest the...
A third term?
No. He attempted to contest the seat of the Secretary General of the UNO. Yes, there was a time he attempted to. We don't know what happened. So I don't know who can occupy this position. Any person that you think, will do well, you better start hearing things that gives you misgivings.
A taint, a dent on their character.
Yes.
Yeah.
We didn't time in office. Maybe we've not searched enough, but I've read so much about Kofi Annan.
How much can he be likened to another great African, Nelson Mandela?
Well, Nelson Mandela's own was restricted to a country, South Africa. Kofi Annan started from United Nations as a staff, was working there, head of budget, assistant secretary general for some years before he became the secretary. Maybe that was why he performed very well, you know.
He had gone through the ropes.
Yes, and if you look at his history in Ghana too, it was a modest and humble upbringing. So I don't know, maybe we should start doing research to know where we can fault him. Because for now, I've not seen anywhere he can be faulted. He was a straightforward man.
He was.
He had opportunity to be political, but he was not. He was objective in all his actions as a United Nations Secretary General. Yes, Nelson Mandela is a global hero too, because he fought against apartheid and he brought freedom to his people. But surprisingly, I don't know what is happening. The Africans in South Africa have refused to learn, have refused to toe the line of Nelson Mandela. How long did the man depart this world that they started attacking Africans?
Kofi Annan had the most befitting burial for a statesman, a diplomat, an international statesman, and a Nobel Peace Prize recipient.
Yes, himself and...
Tony Dania, lawyer and political analyst. I'd like to thank you for joining me on Africa this week. Thank you for your thoughts. Now, so much to say about the man Kofi Annan, who against all odds rose to the pinnacle of international diplomacy, made his mark as a global citizen and leaves behind a complicated legacy and profound lessons to be learned. At a time when Africa and the world is faced with a new set of complicated challenges, society would always be in need of heroes, some of them finding their voice as advocates, activists, or just everyday people who want to make a difference. That's our package for today, and I have been your guide, Fadisha Lashotingwa. Many thanks for watching, and bye for now.